Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Crypt Finder. So, my favorite subgenre of horror by a country mile would be vampires. Werewolves would probably be a very distant second. And I've already done a video all about 7 underrated werewolf movies that I think that you should check out. I decided to do the same thing with vampires. So, wow, vampires. I mean, it runs the gamut, basically. The interpretations of vampires, it can range from scary to sort of comedic to more art house interpretations of them. And I'm going to try to stay away, of course, from any of the sort of big budget Hollywood spectacles that are out there, such as Blade or Interview with a Vampire or The Lost Boys or any iteration of Fright Night. Those are all really good films and they're really well known, but because they're so well known, they already get a lot of love and attention. And instead, I want to discuss some of the ones that you might not be as familiar with. You might have heard of one or two of these somewhere down the line. You might have even seen them, but hey, my guess is if you're here and you're watching this right now, one, you really like horror movies, and two, if you're watching this video, I bet you like vampire films. And if you do, I think all of them on this list, you'll find a little bit of value in them. So I will tell you now, these are some of the outliers. They're just not going to be found on a lot of YouTubers like top 10 list because they're not. They're very, very different films. And again, I'm staying away from any of those huge, big, giant movies that they're very popular. They make a lot of money, but these films, well, I guess the filmmakers went the road less traveled, and it really did make all the difference because they went in with much smaller budgets, and because of that, maybe they could do somewhat of a different interpretation of vampirism, and always certainly respected when a filmmaker tries to do that. So we're going to take a look at these together. Just one caveat. I jettisoned all reference to any film that would feature Count Dracula. And the reason for that is because I want to do another video all about taking Bram Stoker's masterpiece, that novel, and translating it to the silver screen. And it's gonna take me a little while to do that because I want to be as thorough as possible. So with that being said, really in no particular order of importance or anything, we're just going to run through the 7 underrated vampire movies that I think you should check out. Okay, coming in at number 7 is Thirst. Now, I need you to stay with me here for just a second. So, there is a movie. It is a Korean film called Thirst about a priest, and he volunteers to be injected with a virus to find a cure for a disease, and it results in him being infected by the transfusion, and he develops this thirst for blood. And that's a very good film from 2009. And yes, I think that you should check it out because it's well acted, it's well directed, beautiful cinematography. That's just not the movie that I want to talk about. So sorry to throw you that hard left turn right there. But the movie I want to talk about, it's same name. It's called Thirst, but it's from 1979 and hails from Australia. This movie's never really discussed very much, and it does fall into the Ozploitation label. That was just sort of a category of low budget horror movies and comedies and even sex exploitation and action films that were made in Australia after the introduction of the R rating in 1971. And so it began sort of a new wave movement of films coming out of Australia. Now, this particular film, it seems like nobody remembers it. Nobody ever discusses it in any way, but it is a fascinating movie. It has such an original concept here. So there's a secret society called the Brotherhood, and they kidnap the last living descendant of Elizabeth Bathory, and they attempt to brainwash her into ultimately joining their cult. I hope everyone here already knows who Elizabeth Bathory is. If not, pause this video, go Google that, and then maybe hop on back in here. Granted, it's not essential that you know who Elizabeth Bathory is, not even when watching this movie, but having some context of how history remembers her and her crimes, that's a little bit helpful. So this cult, they drink blood, they maintain youth and energy, and because of the society's connections, they have become very wealthy and very powerful people. And they're not vampires in the traditional sense. They do have a set of silver fangs that they pop in while they're feeding. It's almost more like a type of religious ritual that they follow, but very fascinating. And there's also competing bloodlines for a power hold. So this one, it plays out in a very offbeat and bizarre way, but it's such an interesting movie. It goes in some really odd directions. This is the first film that I ever saw where they sort of talk about the idea of almost like mass production, of taking human beings and actually using them as a food source within a laboratory environment. It's just really, really cool. So check it out. Okay, up next at number 6 is The Deathmaster from 1972. Yep, this one won't be on a lot of people's list. It's a very strange, very surreal film, but I do think it's worth your time. Now, if the beginning of this movie sort of puts you off, okay, skip it, but I'm gonna like detail it for you anyway, just because it's probably gonna let you know if this is one for you or maybe you want to avoid it altogether. So there's this hippie named Barbados, and he begins a ritual in the dunes above the California coastline. He unpacks a pan flute, and he actually summons a coffin that rises up out of the ocean. It washes onto the beach. It's found by a surfer who is killed by Barbados, and then Barbados just drags the coffin off down the beach in broad daylight. Now, if that doesn't scream, hey, I'm a very different kind of film, yeah, nothing will. It stars Robert Query as a mysterious guru named Corda, who ingratiates himself into a hippie commune, and he sort of becomes their cult-like leader. He's very magnetic, and he ends up talking a lot of like just sort of new age mumbo jumbo, and they just completely fall for it. One young man, Pico, he begins to question all this sort of existential ramblings that Corda is spouting, and he begins to suspect that, yeah, they're all in grave danger. I don't really know what people would think about this movie today because it is so far removed from the time that it was made and the culture. The idea of an undead Charles Manson, that's a really compelling take. But at the time this came out, it was sort of lowbrow and tacky. It was probably just too close to the Tate LaBianca murders and the Manson family trials. And I think that most viewers, they're going to laugh at the Nehru jackets and the love beads and all of the sort of hippy drippy things that everybody's spouting. And yet Robert Query, who stars in the film, he's actually really good. Robert Query, I mean, he always was, frankly. He was always good. He plays it with a real seriousness that I'm not certain another actor could have brought to the role. It's definitely low budget, drive-in fare for sure. It feels like that Roger Corman could have easily had a hand in this because it's just so exploitive in places, and yet I would say it's a little bit of a connection to another vampire role that Robert Quarry played. He played Count Yorga in the films Count Yorga Vampire and The Return of Count Yorga. And yet, in both of those films, the Count and the character of Corda in The Deathmaster are a little bit similar to each other. They're both creatures of the night, they're infiltrating into modern day society. This was a late night staple, by the way, when I was a kid. And I've just got to say that if you're sitting alone in the 1970s, 2 o'clock in the morning, everything's dark, the house is quiet, this movie plays very differently than it ever could today. And if you think it's all bad acting and you can't get past the sort of hippie counterculture movement, again, I totally understand. This movie was made it was a different time, and it was made for a different kind of viewer. Just believe me that when you're young, you're impressionable, all the illogical little bits, they just sort of melt away along with some of the overacting. So it was just a very different experience. And I know some of the nonsensical bits just, I don't know, somehow when you're young and you're watching it, all of that becomes somehow more unsettling. And so I still think you should probably give it a watch. Also, please be on the lookout for Bobby Boris Pickett. Many people might know him because he co-wrote and performed the hit single Monster Mash in 1962. Here, he plays this young hippie named Kirkwood, so just kind of be on the lookout for him. He even actually plays the guitar and sings. Come on, what more could you want in a movie? At number 5, we have Vampire's Kiss from 1989. This isn't a horror film per se. This is more of a screwball black comedy. It tells the story of a literary agent named Peter Lowe, and he is played absolutely to the hilt by Nicolas Cage. And he believes he's bitten by a vampire that he meets in a New York nightclub. The role was originally going to be played by Dennis Quaid, so it would have been maybe a little bit quirky, but probably a much more somber film than the one that we get. Instead, Cage's over the top antics are on full display, and frankly, everything, the performances, the music, the lighting, it seems like they said, hey, everybody, we're making a horror film. Just don't tell Nick Cage. He thinks we're making a comedy. The script is by Joseph Minion, who also was the scriptwriter for the Griffin Dunn vehicle After Hours. And if you've seen that film, you're going to see a little bit of similarities, not only in the main characters, but also by the end of both films, because both of the characters are sort of lost in a haze of gritty New York streets and some offbeat, surreal characters. There are some compelling bits in here about misogyny in the workplace and the horrid treatment of low-wage workers, but it just all gets lost in Cage's overblown performance. The reason this movie is on the list is because, yes, you can watch this as a movie about a man losing his mind and his life just unraveling, but there is another interpretation, and it's just a little bit more interesting. You cannot take your eyes off Jennifer Beals in this movie. She plays the vampire Rachel, and I mean, Cage is constantly trying to upstage every single scene, and yet her voice is very breathy. She's sort of whispery in those moments that it's just the two of them, and it totally draws you in. And like a magician's sleight of hand, you don't know if she's actually there or not, or if any portion of their relationship is actually what you think it is. My point here is it's possible to have a reading where they hooked up once, it got violent, Cage was bitten, and he began to believe she was a vampire and that he was becoming a vampire, and there you go. That's the impetus for his descent into total madness. That's one way to interpret it, but there's another. When Cage sees her in a club and he begins to scream at all the partygoers that are there, like, look at her teeth, look at her teeth. She's a vampire. Watch her face. Watch Jennifer Beals, her eyes as he's dragged away. There's a slight little tremor of fear until she realizes everyone is laughing, and they go right back to the beat of the music. And I don't know if it was something the director and Beals discussed, or it's the editing, or Jennifer Beals was just so nuanced in her performance, but it totally works. I think having that ambiguity of what's real and what isn't, and what we should actually be believing about this movie, I think that's what really makes it fascinating. And I think that moment in the club is the most revealing scene in this movie. So if you have seen it, go back and watch it again. But watch it with the intent that it's all real. It's all really happening. And if you come into this fresh, okay, ignore all of Nicolas Cage's over-the-top antics and just focus on the idea that all of this is really happening and she's a real vampire. And maybe you'll develop a little bit of a different appreciation for it. At number 4, we have a made-for-TV movie called Vampire from 1979. Just by the very nature of a made-for-TV movie, it's going to have a slower pace, a lot less bloodshed. There's no gore, there's no nudity, there's no profanity. It's just a different kind of movie and a different pacing to that movie. It was also made to be a pilot for a series that never got off the ground, so the ending might seem a little weaker. It might leave you yearning for a more succinct, incredible finale that ultimately doesn't happen. The movie stars Richard Lynch as the vampire Anton Wojtek, who has a really great resurrection scene. He begins moving into very wealthy social circles in San Francisco, but he's also, of course, responsible for a series of murders that have the town on edge because all the victims have been found with a slit throat and drained of blood. You have Jason Miller here, who was Father Karras in The Exorcist. And here he plays John Rawlins, who, along with his wife Leslie, they're both high-end architects, and they end up crossing paths with Wojtek. You have Jessica Walter and E.G. Marshall co-starring, and the real thrill in this movie is just how convincing Richard Lynch is. He's suave, he's powerful, he's brutal, and he really holds a grudge, so it makes for some very engaging cat and mouse games. Lynch actually said that this was his favorite role, and he really seems to just relish playing the villainous Anton Wojtek in this movie. I wish this had turned into a series, no matter what approach they had taken, even if it had been like a continuation of The Hunt for Wojtek or a serialized anthology with different characters. Wouldn't have mattered. I would have been there and I would have watched it. All right, at number 3 from 1970 is House of Dark Shadows. Now, I am going to do a completely separate video just on this particular film because frankly it would take me quite a long time. I'd have to devote way more time and attention to discussing this one particular film than any of the others on the list. And the reason for that is, well, you're just going to have to trust me. There is something very specific and very special about this film. It's difficult to understand now, and because we're so far removed from the pop cultural phenomena that was the soap opera Dark Shadows, which ultimately inspired this film. So I know it sounds a little bit like a cop-out, but grasping why it's such an underrated vampire film, you sort of have to understand its origins and why and how this movie even exists at all and why it's one of a kind. But for the purposes of this video, just in a nutshell, this was the brainchild of Dan Curtis, and this was his chance, right? This was the opportunity to take a soap opera from ABC, which ran from 1966 to 1971, and to actually translate that onto the big screen. And frankly, the movie stands on its own. It fits in nicely with other films at that moment in history, attempting to transplant the idea of a vampire with all of those sort of gothic trappings into a modern day world. Certainly, this wasn't the first time that it happened, but it was part of sort of a cultural wave of films, doing it all in very close proximity of each other. This is true with Count Yorga Vampire. It was released just about 4 months prior to House of Dark Shadows in 1970. And from 1972, you had the exact same theme in Blackula, The Night Stalker, and Dracula, AD 1972 from Hammer Studios. The movie focuses on the very wealthy Collins family who live in a massive estate called Collinwood in Maine. A local handyman named Willie Loomis thinks that he's found a clue to hidden treasure that's been lost for generations, buried in the Collins family cemetery. And he does discover a chained casket in a hidden vault. And then sometime later, the Collins clan are shocked to find an English cousin they never even knew existed on their doorstep named Barnabas Collins. He's the spitting image of the original Barnabas Collins in a portrait over the fireplace in the manor, and he's welcomed into their home. He's even allowed to buy and refurbish the original Collinwood called the Old House that was just sort of wasting away and rotting on the estate. And, of course, don't you know it? I don't have to tell you this. He's the original Barnabas Collins, a vampire returned from the grave. And it turns out that the young governess, yeah, she happens to look exactly like his long lost love, Josette. Dan Curtis was able to sort of just wash this whole thing in tons of blood and give it that sort of Hammer Studios vibe to really great effect. Yes, it still plays out a little like a soap with romance. There are condensed moments that could have used a little bit more breathing room, and maybe too many ideas are just sort of crammed into a tight 90-minute runtime, but it's often underappreciated for what it does really well. It's a modern horror film with all the gothic tropes still in place. You've got solid acting and a gorgeous blood soaked conclusion. Oh, sorry, everyone. It's fruit punch. Yeah, just fruit punch. I'm sorry, I got a little thirsty. Give me just 1 second. I'll be right back with you. Just hold on a minute. All right, coming in at number 2 is Vampire Circus from 1972, and this hails from Hammer Studios. Hammer had really made a mark in the world of cinema with very fresh, innovative color adaptations of classic movie monsters. They continued the story of Baron Frankenstein. They had a whole series of films featuring Dracula. They had a sort of reimagining of The Mummy. They even had a great werewolf film with Curse of the Werewolf. And so here, by the early 70s, they were branching out. They were really trying to attract more viewers. And this was one of, I guess, the stranger outings the company ever produced. The story focuses on a 19th century traveling troupe called the Circus of Night, which, spoiler alert, they're all vampires. I bet you couldn't have seen that coming. They end up in a small town named Stettel. It's a small Serbian village, and it's been confronted with a devastating plague, and so they're cut off by the authorities, and there are blockades, so the vampires move in, and it's easy pickings. The events in the middle of the film are a lot more interesting than the wraparound story of Count Mitterhaus in the beginning and the conclusion, but it's still very stylish, has a strange kind of fairy tale vibe to it. I can actually remember seeing this one when I was young and being shocked at the amount of violence and the violence done toward children, which was sort of unusual in a film at that time. It's not going to rock your world. Let me just say that. It's not the greatest vampire flick of all time, but it's good, and it does deserve to be mentioned much more often than it is. Just the idea of vampires performing feats such as flying acrobats that suddenly turn into bats and then back into human form for an audience of peasants who don't realize that it's anything more than just a stunt, yeah, it's pretty compelling. The acting, not the strength of the movie, but you do have some strong performances by Adrian Corey and also Anthony Higgins. He's billed as Anthony Corlin, but he's very effective as this sort of brooding, vicious, sexy vampire named Emil. And for Hammer fans, seeing this actor as a vampire after playing the hero Paul Paxton in Taste the Blood of Dracula just a few years before, yeah, it's a lot of fun. At number 1 from 1971, it's the movie Let's Scare Jessica to Death. This film has received a lot of attention over the last few years, as it should. It's on my list, though, because I really want to talk about its strengths as an underrated vampire film. I don't know why this is true, but I just truly believe in my gut. Any low budget horror movie from the 1970s has some sort of built in creepiness factor you just can't duplicate today. I don't know if it's the graininess of the film or the fact that you might not know all of the cast members, so it feels a little bit more realistic, almost like a documentary kind of feel to it. I don't know why it's as unsettling as it is, but thankfully we have a lot of good examples. Maybe it's just that filmmakers were starting to push the boundaries of what was expected, and so they all had this very weird, unsettling vibe. You can look at Frogs or Squirm, or Food of the Gods, or even The Town That Dreaded Sundown. Even The Legend of Boggy Creek has it. It's just some kind of odd pacing that when things start to get strange, they would get very strange, and you didn't know what the filmmakers would do next. And this film is an excellent example because the locations are atmospheric. The acting is solid by a mostly unknown cast. You have a very compelling story. The music by Orville Strober is haunting. And in the end, you come away uncertain how much of what plays out is real or not. Jessica is such a fragile character throughout the film that ultimately she's an unreliable narrator. We don't know if what she's seeing is real in any sense, and even the scenes that she's not in, we don't know if those are just made up in her mind to sort of fill in some of the gaps. The basic story is that Jessica has just been released from a mental institution. We're never told why she was there, but there are a couple hints throughout the film that it probably was due to the death of her father. In fact, part of her recovery is doing tombstone etchings to sort of soothe some of her fears. Her husband Duncan has spent their savings on a farm, and their family friend Woody comes along to help get the apple orchard going. And once there, they find a young hippie squatting in the house named Emily. She's young, she's a free spirit. Woody is smitten enough that they ask Emily to stay on for a little while. So much of the movie is sort of toying with Jessica's anxieties. There are whispers in her head, the antagonistic town people, the mute girl that seems to always be warning her, the cove behind the house where something tried to drag her down into the water. And yes, this is a vampire film. I do want to make that pretty clear. The biting, the cutting, the blood drinking. For some reason, I see people wanting to classify this more as a film, more of a ghost story than a vampire movie. And yeah, I mean, I guess I could understand it. Perhaps it's just more ethereal than most vampire films, and the lack of explanations, or there's no fangs, there's no crosses, garlic, anything like that. Any of those sort of standard tropes you would find in vampire movies, because those are all given the boot. Yeah, it creates a different kind of film than what you're expecting. Zora Lampert as Jessica, she's really terrific. And Marie Claire Costello as Emily, both of them are so intriguing to watch. So if you've never seen this movie, please, please go check it out. And there you have it. 7 underrated vampire films that, yeah, I think that you should absolutely check out. It might be a little bit of everything. It might be sort of a different interpretation of vampire lore or the way that they're presented, or, yeah, there just maybe it's some nostalgic charm. But I definitely think that you should give them a chance. By exploring these lesser known films, I mean, not only are you going to certainly enhance your horror repertoire, but you're also going to be giving a lot of support to some very creative and innovative filmmakers that definitely decided to leave some of those horror tropes way behind and just carve their own path. I hope this list has inspired you to dig a little bit deeper into the shadows. And if you've seen any of these movies, please absolutely comment about what you think about them. And if you have no clue what these movies are, but you go and watch them, please, yes, come back and give us your thoughts and impressions. As always, everyone, until the next time, stay curious and stay scared.